It's been about a year since we've talked about Rainbow Six Siege, and it's the perfect time to do a follow-up. If you'd asked me early last year if Siege would continue to grow its audience the way that it had in 2016, I'm not sure what my answer would have been. Obviously, Ubisoft was going to continue making more characters and maps, but I assumed that the popularity of the game might plateau if those additions weren't all that interesting. I also suspected that Ubisoft might start developing a direct sequel to Siege with an improved foundation, rather than continuing to add to the game for years after its launch. Kind of like Destiny 2, except hopefully with better results. Regardless, that's why I was surprised when I read some comments from the company that had been made around the time of the release of the Velvet Shell season. The hope was that Siege would someday have over 100 operators to choose from, obviously added over the course of years. It's a tall order, and it would take an immense amount of time and work to accomplish something like that, especially if each character is going to be truly unique and not just serve as an alternate pick to a role that's already in the game. I ended up being wrong about the popularity. Siege is more popular than ever now at the start of a third year of content, and the development team has proven that they're committed to making the game bigger and better than ever. But that doesn't mean that it isn't worth discussing all the ups and downs of Rainbow Six's second year on this earth. So let's dive a bit more deeply into one of my favorite games of the last few years, a game that I really haven't stopped playing. The previous video was made after the release of the first season of the year, which did a great job of pushing the core gameplay back into what it was always meant to be. We had an attacker who's designed to punish players roaming around the map, and we had a defender whose ability benefits everyone who's playing on the objective, which is a stark contrast to the kinds of characters that were added during the first year. I remember a lot of people speculating about what the remaining 6 operators might be. I was honestly very excited to see the direction the game might go in. It's important to remember that the roadmap for year 2 was pretty much exactly the same for the first year. 4 operators and 4 maps spread out over 4 seasons. And there was no reason to doubt that this wouldn't play out as advertised. But then Season 2 came out of nowhere, and it was revealed to be something called Operation Health. Ubisoft decided that the game wasn't where it needed to be, and so it would be better to spend an entire season ironing out bugs and improving the engine performance. All of this would be happening in place of the intended Hong Kong operators. And the original Season 3 was split in half. We got all the characters we were slated to get, but we did lose a map. And at the time, I remember being pretty upset because it just doesn't make sense. How are the people working on game balance and character modeling and animation, as well as map design, supposedly the same people charged with fixing all of the bugs and the servers and all of that stuff? It didn't make sense. And I would argue that in a way it still doesn't, but as Ubisoft was pretty transparent with all of this, releasing blog post after blog post detailing all of the changes that would be coming, all of the improvements, I started to understand what was going on. It is true that the game was at its buggiest that it had been since launch in the first season of the new year. And maybe they just felt that it wasn't worth adding new content that could potentially be bugged to shit. For instance, there were a lot of issues with Hibana because she can launch out these little pellets in groups of 6, and there can be 3 different groups of them on the map at one time. And then those pellets will all detonate and cause damage, and that has to be rendered on every player's server. So things like that needed to be streamlined, and I can see how a new character like Legion might have had some serious issues given the amount of deployables that he can put on the map. There were other changes made that just made a lot of sense. For instance, there's no reason that the skyboxes should be rendered in real time, since the weather and the time of day does not change at all. That's just a waste of space. But by far the most important thing to come out of Operation Health was the addition of the technical test server. Because of this, the Siege team has really guaranteed that operators aren't going to be released into the wild with some kind of game-breaking bug attached to them, as has happened in the past. It's a pretty great feature, and it hasn't really slowed down the rate at which patches are applied to the game. Now, I wasn't really playing Rainbow Six a lot during Operation Health because I was disappointed that we didn't get anything new. I took some time and played other games, other competitive shooters, only to realize that I didn't like them as much as Siege. But when Season 3 finally came around, it really was a breath of fresh air. Not only because of the elongated wait, but because the new characters filled a niche that hadn't really been explored all that much. I like to call that season Peak Trap because of the sheer amount of traps that could now be thrown around by Legion and Ella, two characters that I think have made the biggest impact out of all of the operators from Year 2. A lot of high-level play in Siege involves rushing, just trying to get into the objective as quickly as possible, and that's a lot harder to do when the defenders have access to these little mines that they can plant and slow people down. Legion in particular is probably one of my favorite characters in the entire game because of the way that he becomes more powerful as he survives the round. It's the opposite of some defenders who immediately use their gadget and then kind of just do whatever during the actual game. He needs to stay in the fight so that he can keep generating more mines over the course of the battle. So after a few months of enjoying myself and getting back into the spirit of Siege, we got the final season of the year, which came with the new tower map. A map that I find myself loving and hating at the same time. I love the concept, it's a really cool set piece, and it definitely feels distinct from the other maps. But I always feel like I'm at a huge disadvantage when on offense, especially in the hostage game mode, due to the fact that this map doesn't have a traditional exterior. Maybe I just need to spend more time with it, but I definitely don't feel like it's one of the better maps that was added to the game. The new characters, on the other hand, are still really great additions, especially the two attackers, Zofia and Dokkaebi. Dokkaebi in particular is kind of genius because her gadget can affect the phones that the defenders use, which is a game mechanic that no other operator has really been able to mess around with or counter. It was a really smart idea, and the fact that her ability is sort of a global pulse also makes it distinct. It's hard-hitting, it's fast, but it's not necessarily a death sentence for the defenders. Zofia, on the other hand, is a very punchy kind of operator. I get the sense that since defenders have so many new ways to fortify and garrison their position, they needed someone who could really just blow through a lot of that and disorient anybody inside. Honestly, I really loved most of the characters that they added. I think there's only two that I'm not so big on, but I don't think they're bad characters at all. A game like this is going to have characters who are picked more frequently than others, and everyone has a role to fill. Except for Tachanka, who will always be terrible. There is one other distinguishing feature that was added during this season. It was actually, I think, added during the end of Operation Health, and that was the loot packs that I mentioned in my last video as they were teasing the feature. These are something that was added pretty quietly to the game, not really worth discussing, but given the unprecedented media attention put towards loot boxes in other games, it's very important that we go over how Siege did this system right. Alpha packs, as they're called, are something that you have a chance to win every time you win a game. Your odds of getting one increase every time you play a full match. They can contain one skin, headgear, charm, something like that. And it's also possible to purchase them using a little bit of the in-game currency, Renown. There is no way to buy these with real money. That wouldn't make any sense. Most cosmetic items in the game can be purchased with real money directly. The randomness of the alpha packs is not being used as some kind of way to steal your money. It's just being used to add a bit of variety to the game. There are tons of skins and headgears that I would never spend my renown on because I don't really play the character or I don't like the look of it that much. Getting these for free in an alpha pack still feels great because even though they're not something I would have gone out of my way to purchase, just having it there is fun because now on the off chance that I'm playing someone I don't play a lot like Caveira, I have that terrible kiss headgear that I think is so stupid, but I love wearing it because if I kill someone and they see that, I know it's going to make them laugh or something. And believe me, if this system was done badly, I would be honest about it. I wouldn't try to dance around it just because I like the game. Honestly, the entire progression system of Overwatch and the fact that it really feels like a game that only exists to push the loot box The fact that I've seen people spend hundreds of dollars on these things, I don't like that stuff. I really don't. But I think that Siege has found a nice niche. They've figured out what people like about getting a random reward, but they've also figured out what people don't like about it, which is spending money. Obviously, this is subject to change given the introduction of the Outbreak packs. However, I'm going to save that discussion for later, because it's not part of Year 2. I look at this whole year of Siege, and I think that this was the time that Ubisoft proved that it wasn't a fluke, that they were really dedicated to making this game last and grow. And they took several months off of their content schedule just to prove it. How many games can you think of where that's happened, where they've upfront admitted, we need to spend more time making things work under the hood to give you the game that we want to give you? That took a lot of guts. And even though I wouldn't really like to see an Operation Health 2, I'm glad that it happened because it did put the game in a better place. The servers felt a lot more responsive, the hit registration felt a little more on point, and I did like a lot of the little nice graphical improvements that they made. And I think that dream of having 100, 200 operators, I think it's coming a little closer to reality as we enter a third year of content, and maybe a fourth year past that, with who knows what kind of features added in the long run. I can't wait to see. A lot of people are talking about the Outbreak mode, which has been released for the game. It's very different from anything previously put into the game. I'm going to do a video review of that mode once I've played it and gotten a good feel for it. So I hope you'll stay tuned and check it out. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see what's coming next. I'm generally very responsive to comments and messages, whether it's here on YouTube or on my Twitter, so feel free to hit me up if you have a question. See ya.